So tonight's topic, as you can tell by the title of this episode, is going to be a little different. We're not going to present a particular topic like we normally would, but this idea was given to me by my wife, and at first I kind of scoffed at it, to be honest. And then the more I sat with it, the more I realized that it was actually kind of an interesting idea. So
I think it's going to be a hoot. I think it's going to be a blast.
It'll be a little interesting. Again, it won't be us presenting information. This will be far more conversational. But we're looking at fear and the things that we were told we should be afraid of as kids. And, Eric and I grew up in the same sort of span of years. I think Eric's just got a couple more on me, but not very many. So we grew up through a lot of the same
80s
fear
and 90s
fads
kids.
kinds of things. And then originally this was just going to talk about the things that we were supposed to be afraid of growing up. But I also kind of touched on, as you mature and you grow up, your fears change. And so maybe some of the irrational fears that we have now, and even I kind of cast a little forward in time to look at the things that are coming up that people talk about being afraid of. So this is more or less just to look into our lives, the way we were raised. These are the things that we were told we were supposed to be afraid of.
And I think a lot of the listeners out there will probably be able to relate to at least the majority of them. So thanks to Leda Weirs, my partner in crime's wife, for bringing this one up.
From a child born into this world, we are taught what to believe. Closed-minded we become, fearful to be deceived. Still we desire to know what lies beyond that locked door. The art of the storyteller, conjuring tales of legend and lore. History hidden, lost knowledge, things forgotten and the unknown. These are the things that direct us and will set the tone. Welcome, friends, to another episode of Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
For a little background, the emotion of fear is a core part of the human experience. Now, our brains are wired to experience fear as a way to warn us of when we might be in danger. What do we need to do? How do we need to get ourselves out of danger?
Kind of that old caveman mentality. Hey, look behind you, there's a T-Rex.
Yeah. And really that's sort of, whatever your background is, there are certain things, fear you could say is sort of hardwired in over hundreds of thousands of years of human development to essentially just have a certain way of reacting to fear. We have 4 fear responses that are recognized in humanity. We have fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. Now, I know most everybody's familiar with flight or fight, but there's actually 4. And these are just the way our brain processes something that it thinks we should be afraid of and how we should properly react to it so that we survive.
Yeah, it all comes down to survival.
Now, the experience of fear begins in our amygdala. It's the part of the brain that processes most of our emotions, and when activated due to possible danger, it elicits this fear response. Now, this fear response can happen when we are actually in danger, when we believe we are in danger, when we experience scary stimuli, like watching a scary movie, or you can artificially stimulate the amygdala. Now,
that could be even like roller coaster rides and
anything
any
like
of that kind of stuff. Skydiving, if you want to take it to some other extremes.
So the amygdala processes emotional responses. The frontal lobe and the prefrontal cortex, they control things like language and impulse control. Now, when we experience fear, our brain reroutes energy to the amygdala, our survival. It wants to survive. And so that's why very smart people will do very dumb things when they're afraid. Our brain is literally wired that way. So these fear responses, fight. It's pretty obvious. Our brain perceives danger and it wants to fight that threat. Are you big enough, mean enough to take out whatever it is that's coming after you? Whether that's physical, whether it's verbal, it's usually accompanied by anger.
The last time I tried to do that, I was suspended on a ladder about 15 foot up, cleaning the gutters out, and I grabbed a wasp's nest.
Very similar.
I wanted to fight, but I really wasn't in the position to fight.
Very similar when I was doing some yard work and I found a yellow jacket nest. Once they started stinging me, my first impulse was to find whatever I could to spray these guys down. Flight. If your brain does not think you can fight the danger, your brain wants you to get out of there, to be safe.
I flighted right off the top of that ladder.
Now, freeze, another response, very valid, was to freeze. And the theory here is that your brain is, if you just don't move,
it won't see you.
It won't notice you.
it'll move on to the next target.
And then, of course, fawn, the weird one, in my opinion, and one that I don't know that I've ever experienced, but this is your brain decides that you need to please whatever it is that you're afraid of so that it will not harm you, which I can understand. Maybe you might see that in like an abuse case or something like that, where your brain's reaction is like, if
I've never heard of this one. This is interesting.
It's just a way for your brain to say, if I can appease this, if I can make this thing happy, it will not hurt me.
Huh.
So, and again, maybe it's that fear response, when you got an animal coming after you, like a wild, you want to, like a dog or something, if you've got food or something,
give it food. Yeah.
It'll leave you alone. So now I don't know how Eric did his notes. I have some bullet points. I just sort of talked about random things. It's kind of a scatter shot.
That's kind of what I did too. A lot of bullet points. I figured we'd just kind of read off and then maybe bounce back and forth
now,
in between.
Growing up, again, children of the 80s, 90s, I want to say most of the things I was taught to be afraid of came from the 80s.
Yes.
It seems like, and there were a lot of things. It may be late 70s just because, our parents were parents at that time. And so the things we're afraid of now that we teach our kids to be afraid of, they were doing the same thing to us. I think
maybe it was just me, but I thought the same thing as I was doing research. It's like, were we like the only generation that really got like belted in the 80s of more things to be afraid of than the other generations?
It got worse. And I'll tell you why. And this ties in, well, it will tie in with my headline later on. The proliferation of media, the expansion of media. Think about how many bits and pieces of information you're assaulted with per day when you have the radio on in the car and you hear the news, you're watching TV, you're scrolling through the internet, your Facebook feed. Now, I know they didn't have all that stuff back in the 80s, but, previous generations, maybe not every house had a TV.
Right.
Maybe not every house had a telephone. I think in the 80s, at least, I remember every house having those things.
Yeah.
Maybe not every
around here.
Maybe not every car had a radio in it. Maybe, you know what I mean? I think in that time frame, we saw the rise of media. And then in the 90s, everybody had cable and you had the internet come into play. And since then, I think there's so much input into our brains to make us be afraid because, well, in today's day and age, we'd say clicks, right?
Yeah.
Fear gets clicks.
Yep.
And again, I'll talk about that later on when I do my headline. But the idea is the things that make you afraid are the stories you want to hear. Let's be honest. You and I are sitting here doing
this on Nightmares on the Lost Highway
because we grew up with these stories and they scared us and they were interesting. Like, don't get me wrong. I don't know that I was ever afraid of Bigfoot, but there was at least a little part in your head when you read a Bigfoot story that was like, oh man, if I ran into that.
Yeah. Or if you were out in the woods or near the woods and you hear a twig, snap, it's like, oh, I know that's Bigfoot.
And so maybe, I think being children of the 80s as we were, I think a big one to start with that we could riff on a little would just be the Cold War and the threat of nuclear annihilation.
Oh my gosh. That's a huge one.
Now, I know that started before us. All you have to do is look at like Fallout to know that started 40s, 50s time frame, give or take. Definitely post World War II. But even when we were growing up, I think that was still something that was talked about a lot. And I remember like my mom specifically, like when I was, at that inquisitive age and trying to figure out what things were, she told me one time that nuclear weapons had the ability to destroy the planet. And I took that literally.
Yes, I've heard that same
the
terminology.
Planet would fly apart and just be obliterated. I didn't realize when she said that she just meant, environmentally in a way destroy the planet.
And I remember even thinking, I'll take that a step further, when I was a child, I mean, we're saying early preteens to teen here, when I would hear those comments like that, a nuclear bomb, if Russia launches a nuclear bomb at us, then we're going to turn around and we're going to launch a nuclear bomb at Russia. Even at that age, I was like, why? Why would anyone do this if it was so bad? I mean, nobody really needs that power.
But you ask that question when you live in the only nation that's ever used those weapons in wartime.
Exactly. Yeah.
We had a reason, we thought, and we ended the war that way.
But I mean, there was so much media, movies. One of my all-time favorites, honestly, Red Dawn with, Patrick Swayze. The kids are there in the high school and they're watching Russian planes drop paratroopers off that's landing in their football field of the high school, and they run out and they grab of course, that was an era where you had your guns in the back of your pickup and, and all this. What was it? Rocky 3 that had Apollo Creed?
I think, are you talking the one with the Russian? I think it was 4.
3 or 4. Ivan Drago, the big bad Russian dude. We had Apollo Creed, the All-American, we were being fed this.
Well, we were bombarded with the Russians being the bad guys every day. And we were in the Cold War. We knew there was nuclear potential. War Games is another good example.
I love that one, yeah. Matthew Broderick.
But there's so much, even today, though. I mean, that fear is still persistent, don't get me wrong. And I guess we could kind of progress through time. I referenced Fallout, the video game, which the whole point of Fallout is that it's post-apocalyptic.
Yep.
But even, I mean, there's just so much media that shows us a world post-apocalyptic.
Do you remember, and I know you're a little younger than I am, but 1983, there was a movie that came out the day after.
I was too young for that.
Okay.
Now, it's a movie I've thought about watching in the days since because it's supposed to be good.
I would have been 13. I was born in 1970, but showing my age for sure here.
Wow,
but
you got 7 years on me.
It was so of an intense movie. It came out, I did a little research here. It came out on ABC. ABC had to set up a temporary hotline call center during the initial broadcast for people who was watching the movie and thought it was real. They thought this was like a news broadcast. Kind of goes back to Orson Welles, reading
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, freaking people out. And this movie, the day after, which I am going to, I added it to my list. I'm going to watch it hopefully this week. The closing of it is basically probably one of the most horrific scenes in television. It shows a human, I think they were clutching like a chain link fence, and there's this red-orange flash behind them. And then you're looking at that human just as a skeleton. And you're seeing the light shine through the eye sockets and everything.
Eric.
Yes, they've used it a lot. But that was such an impact. And basically the story of that TV movie was nobody will survive.
Oh, yeah, no.
To your point, just like what your mom kind of told you and then you took to be true. That's exactly what this movie pushed. Is like, yeah, there's none of us getting out of this alive.
No, nobody wins.
Nobody wins.
I mean, even to this day, there's websites that'll show you what it's like if you can pick the megaton and all that of a bomb being dropped at a specific location. And I have, on more than one occasion, and I hope this doesn't get picked up on any FBI thing, but looked at okay, what if they dropped an X-level nuclear bomb on Fort Leonard Wood?
Yeah.
Because I figure, militarily speaking, that's the closest target that an enemy may go against.
Right.
Now, obviously, you have St. Louis and Kansas City, which if you were looking for impact, but those places are farther away. So I have looked at okay, what if they dropped a bomb on Fort Leonard Wood? And there are websites that will show you where the initial blast radius, the fallout zones and all that. Now we live west of Fort Leonard Wood. So obviously we're in a much better place, but we're not far enough away. And if you go with the fallout rule of thumb thing, I think, we're far enough away that would work. But
do you remember back in high school, they used to pass out pamphlets with that kind of information on it?
No, that was, I remember hearing about those things and I've seen them in video and whatnot. I never experienced it.
It was and literally, I think the label, I found an image online and it wasn't the exact one like our school got, but the one online was Russian nuke target maps. And literally they handed these out to the kids and it listed the top 50 sites most likely to be bombed, kind of to your point. And then you kind of,
where am I at?
The imaginary circle. Back on the one that was dated 1985, I think it was, Boston was the number one site. I thought that was weird. New York, number 2. Philadelphia, number 3. Baltimore, number 4, so on and so forth.
Well, the Eastern Seaboard makes sense. Plus, it's the easier to hit.
Yeah.
And then I would imagine the big cities on the West Coast, centrally speaking, they're going to be harder to hit.
Well, you would think something coming over, surely to goodness, we'd be able to shoot it down within a period of time before it would get to the center of the United States.
But back then, it would have been different.
True.
So if you look at technological advancements, I'm sure those maps have changed even. But, being central to the United States,
does have some perks.
I think there are definitely targets, though. So.
Yeah. But can you imagine? I mean, your school is sending these out, and you put it in your backpack, and you take it home, and you can talk to your parents about it.
What I always get a kick out of is the videos of the old duck and cover. Get down onto your desk and put your
stupidity.
It's going to stop. If the roof caves in, maybe you won't get crushed. But yeah, the part you really need to worry about, the radiation and the intense heat.
Yeah. We used to have I'm sure you did too, the big horns that would go off for the practice drills.
Yeah.
And it could have been a tornado. It was just any type of, you'd go out into the hallway or you'd crawl underneath this little desk that you sat at. And I mean, the teachers, Now, they weren't underneath their desks. They were standing up in the hallway. I guess they were going to surrender their lives for the safety of their children. But by golly, they had like a ruler. And if you stuck your head out, I'd get a tap on the head or,
See,
know,
my
something.
mom told me about
Get
those
back
when
under
she
there.
was growing up. But again, I don't think those ever happened when in my school.
I remember doing it. I do. That's just that little bit of age difference between
yeah,
us.
just enough. So what's one that comes to mind for you?
Well, I'm going to take it to a little lighter side, but something I think anyone from the 70s and 80s can relate to: going to the park or maybe even out to recess up on the all metal slide where the sun has baked the metal and
Oh,
you
geez.
slide down this hellacious slide that would burn the skin off your knees, elbows, legs, whatever.
Wow, you did go like differently than me.
Fun
Like I went
times.
heavy.
Fun times right there.
What, did you guys have like the 10-foot tall monkey bars? in
Oh,
yours?
yes.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Yeah. No, I remember those.
And people like walking across the top of them and
Yeah,
stuff. Not
and-
crawling. I mean, literally like walking a tightrope
I
kind of thing.
guarantee you, I remember at least one kid having to go to the hospital for falling out of those things.
Mhm.
We were actually talking about that with my kids last weekend when everybody was all together. We were talking about growing up with, because they did not believe that there used to be monkey bars that were 10 foot tall on the playground.
Oh, yes.
You know, they've got the little monkey bars where you can grab the handles and your feet are still on the ground.
Yep. Oh,
It was like, no, they were like 10 foot tall. And
yeah, this is like something you'd see at the circus or
Yeah.
something. And right along with that, merry-go-rounds.
I got,
all metal merry-go-round.
well, not just what they're made out of. I got launched out of one of those at like
My
terminal
next step.
velocity.
How fast can it spin before you are flung off of that into the nice gravel that they have for you to soften your landing?
it wasn't gravel for me. It was a nice solid rock that decided I landed on knee first. I almost couldn't walk.
Yeah, I remember that we would get I was actually a pretty good sized kid all the way through school. So me and a couple of the other bigger kids, we would, the smaller kids would all eagerly want to go on the merry-go-round and hang on and then us spin them as fast as we possibly could until one, they puked and then everybody, got that. Or two, they just simply couldn't hold on and it would just eject them flying out.
Well, have you seen the YouTube videos where that's been escalated? I've seen one where they had a motorcycle.
Tire on it. Yeah, there's a little part of me that wanted to try that.
No, not even when I was younger. Well, and now if you want to take it, I mean, I'm sure you've heard the stories about like razor blades and on swing sets and things like that. Have you heard those?
No.
No. Well, again, I think as we talk about these fears, we'll talk about how they change. But no, there was a spate of stories a couple of years ago about like people putting razor blades on slides and swings and things like that.
Oh my gosh.
And again, it could be an urban legend. It could be one of those type of things. But I just remember hearing some stories about that and just being shocked.
I do remember a story about syringe needles being found in one of those ball pits.
Oh gosh.
And yeah, I was like, oh wow. So, but ball pits and sanitary, that's another whole.
Syringes. My grandma had one. When you're a little kid and you see the coin return on like a payphone,
Mhm.
my grandma had this story about people putting AIDS tainted needles in those slots.
That's just
And so
evil.
she would, don't stick your finger in there, because
Trying to fish for a
I mean, when you were
dime or a quarter.
when you were a
or
little
whatever.
kid, you'd get like 5, 10 cents, whatever. People put in an extra quarter and you get it.
Well, then, kind of in conjunction with that, brain damage. Were you ever told to be afraid of brain damage? Because you get thrown off the
Well,
merry-go-round.
yeah, I mean, if you fall out of the bunkie.
We didn't wear helmets.
Every time you hit your head, like
Oh, yeah.
I
Riding
remember-
a three-wheeler, a four-wheeler, dirt bike, go-kart, whatever. We didn't wear helmets back then.
To be fair, Eric, we all may have suffered a degree of brain damage.
I know I have. But there was movies out. Overboard with Goldie Hawn. And then probably better known, The Addams Family, Uncle Fester.
Well, yeah.
Amnesia comes in if you get hit in the head, Bill.
I was going to say, we were absolutely
Forget
taught
who
as
you
kids
are.
that if you took a hard enough hit on the head, you were going to get amnesia.
And then you got to get hit in the head again to get it back. I mean, that's scientific. That was proven facts according to the cartoons.
Yeah, like every third episode of the Flintstones.
Yes. Bonk. Oh, he forgot who he was. Hit him again. Bonk. Oh, yeah, there he is again.
No, we were absolutely taught to believe that that was going to happen if you got hit hard enough.
Amnesia.
Now-
It's a thing, apparently.
To be fair, apparently, I mean, obviously you can suffer memory loss from getting hit in the head.
It's rare.
My brother-in-law, and I want to say I've told this story maybe, but he was driving his motorcycle down a country road in Tennessee. And if you've ever been down a country road in Tennessee, You know they made those by just following whatever snake they found.
Yes.
He came around a corner, and a woman was pulling out of her driveway,
Oof.
and he had to lay the bike down.
Slide
and
on that gravel.
he slid head first into the side of her car.
Ah.
They took him to the hospital. They got him checked out. And the way my in-laws described it, they went and got Taco Bell. They got Taco Bell while they were in town. They drove home. And by the time he got home, he was like, why do I taste tacos?
Oh my God.
He had short-term memory loss for like 3 or 4 days. And the doctors
Wow.
were like, well, it should go away on its own. If it's been a few days, you come back. Now, eventually it did go away, which is very fortunate for him because he was going through med school at the time.
Oh,
So you can
goodness.
imagine the investment and the fear that he was going to lose all that. But yeah, he suffered the short-term memory loss from a blow to the head. I don't think they corrected it by hitting him again.
I was going to say, I almost wanted to ask that. It's like, that's probably inappropriate. Did somebody smack him in the head again?
No, I don't believe that happened.
Oh, okay. So which one you got?
So I was going to say, I mean, we'll jump to my next one, which is one, I don't know about you. I still deal with this today. I think it's the reason I have one of my irrational fears that I live with to this day. Killer bees.
Killer bees.
You remember when those became a thing?
Yes.
I did a little research, just in case anybody isn't familiar with the term killer bees. This is a hybrid of the Western honeybee and the East African lowland honeybee. Now, American honeybees, Western honeybees, they're pretty docile, and
Yeah.
I mean, obviously, if you harass them, they're going to sting you. African honeybees were known to be much more aggressive.
Very.
And I guess down in South America, they thought if you combine the two, because I guess African honeybees made a lot of honey, but you know,
They're just too mean.
Well, the idea was they would hybridize them with the Western honeybee to get the African honeybee honey production or something like that. There was a reason they wanted
Best
to
of
combine
both
the two.
worlds. Best of both worlds.
What ended up happening was you just got a very angry bee that just swarmed everywhere. I guess Western had bigger hives or something like that. There were more of them, so they could produce, trying to combine the two to get bigger honey yields, basically. This started in Brazil in the late 50s, and then like 7 swarms got free, and,
Well, yeah.
I
How do
guess-
you enclose truly
Yeah.
bees? I mean, itty bitty little hole, and they're going to be gone.
And then I guess the first hives hives, I guess would be the right word, natural hives,
Nests or whatever. Yeah.
were discovered in Texas in 1990.
I remember this. I do
Now-
remember this.
They are responsible for killing like 1,000 people since their introduction. And part of the reason is the victims will receive 10 times more stings than they do from other honeybees because they swarm you. And I guess once one of them stings you, it's like a pheromone marker,
Yep.
and then they all sting you.
Bullseye. Yep.
They've also killed like horses and cattle and other animals, anything that will disturb their hive. Now, when I was growing up, the reason this sticks in my head, and I don't know, I'm sure you'll remember, there was this huge trend for a while in the late 70s and early 80s of like swarm movies
Yes. Yes.
where it was bees or crabs or ants.
I see a title that says The Swarm, I think, or something like that. I remember.
And I remember watching like movies with people trapped in a bus and they're clogging all the openings, and then they left one vent open in the roof and the bees come in
Just
and they
kind of
kill
gradually.
everybody. And I just remember like I don't like being stung. I don't think anybody does. Now I don't have an allergy, but still, like I played outside a lot and got stung a
Oh
lot.
yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
the idea that like, oh, if you see a beehive, my grandpa had beehives, had like 2 of them. And I remember watching a bee swarm one time. I don't know if have you ever seen that?
Just on like watching on the internet or TV.
We were at my grandma's, and my grandpa had 2 cows, and my grandpa was amateur farmer. Let's put it that way. Had like a garden, and he had
Hobby
some
farmer.
beehives. There you go, hobby.
Farmer.
Had a couple of cows and some chickens and things like that. And we went over there one day for something, and they were like, oh, well, you guys can't go outside and play. And we said, why? They had a sliding glass door. This would have been daytime, middle of the day, let's say, afternoon maybe. And I remember thinking that the sky was unusually dark. And then as I watched, I could see that it was just bees.
Covering the
They were
patio
just-
door.
Well, no, they were just flying. They were
Oh.
just everywhere in the air. And I was freaking out. I thought they were going to kill the cows and everything. Like, oh, God, they're going to get the cows. And they're like, no, bees just do that sometimes, but don't go outside. Let them do what they're doing. But it was just, I think that triggered something in me because to this day, that is still an irrational fear of mine. If there is a swarm of something, I cannot handle.
Well,
I don't even like watching it on TV.
Kind of going back to the whole caveman mindset. if Godzilla was invading, okay, huge Godzilla, you might get stepped on, but he's so big, your chances of being overlooked would be good. If you have something as small as a bee by the thousands, I think there's a more real fear factor there than.
But I guess the science of it is when they swarm, they're not interested in you.
No, I think it's something
they're
that's messed up
establishing a
their-
new hive.
Yeah, their pecking order or whatever.
Well, usually what it is they've outgrown their current hive, and so they've spawned a new queen, and she's taking off, and it's sort of the hive's way of like, okay, half of us are going with A and half of us are going with B, I think. And so, yeah,
a little war amongst themselves.
Later on, I was told that, like, no, you really wouldn't have had anything to worry about, but still.
Made you worry.
Freaked me out, man. And then if you want to look at some of the other, like the movie Piranha.
I talk about piranhas. Yeah. Yeah.
I was horrified of that.
Well, what about three-wheelers? Do you remember three-wheelers?
I didn't grow up with ATV stuff. Now,
Okay.
I've heard all the stories.
Now, I grew up out in the country, but before there was the ever popular four-wheeler, quad racers and all that, there was three-wheelers. Very popular in the mid-'80s. And basically, they were almost outlawed because they were considered a death trap.
Oh, yeah.
And I will say, I never owned one. I had some friends of mine that had three-wheelers because that was a, pre-dawn to the four-wheeler.
Yeah.
But if you would get to going at a pretty good speed and you would turn that thing really sharp, I mean, it's science. There's three wheels, not four, to support you, and it will tip, especially if you were going up a pond bank or something like that. So yeah, three-wheelers I never had, but I did have a four-wheeler, and it became a game. This is how smart I was, probably still am. You would see, like, on the pond bank, how steep of a hill can I go before it flips over on top of me? We used to play that. I mean, we used to do that. Not to mention we'd make ramps and jump on, not only on our bicycles, but on our four-wheelers and different things like that. But
Now, not expressly three-wheeler, four-wheeler, but there was a guy on my road that had a dune buggy. And he used to take it out and speed up and down the roads. And to tell you, like, you talk about being taught to be afraid. My uncle lived up the road from us, and this guy was going by on his dune buggy. He had his kid with him, I think, and I don't know what happened. I don't know what caused it.
Probably no seatbelts.
He wrecked. The thing basically just disintegrated.
Yep.
Threw a tire through my uncle's fence. I remember he had a big hole in his fence there for a long time. And my uncle apparently held the kid while they died.
Oh.
And had, like, exposed
Head trauma and
brain matter. And so.
Yeah, probably obviously no helmets, no seatbelts.
Yeah, and just speeding up and down at an unreasonable pace. So that was definitely something like you wouldn't catch me in one of those things no matter what. Like and then my uncle buys one of them years later. And, of course, my mom's like, oh, your uncle's safe. Go ahead and ride with him. And here I am remembering this traumatic story.
Oh my gosh. They had to buckle you in so you wouldn't try to fly out or run out.
I imagine there was a lot of negotiating to even get me in the first place back then. Because I was one of those kids that if you told me something like that, I was done with it. Like, anything like that. So I know that I probably did not want to get on it.
Well, kind of going back to the ever popular childhood park ride, I know there was very different versions of this, but essentially it's the same ride. You'd find it at carnivals, at circus. We had one up at Lake of the Ozarks, and it was called the Madman's Mixer. I don't know if you remember that or not. Imagine, if you will, again, all metal construction, a gigantic round room, had a door that you would go in.
Wow.
Probably,
I know what you're talking about.
Probably 12 people, maybe 15 would fit in it, and it would begin to spin.
Yeah.
Now, you would be able to lean up against the wall. At some point, it would be spinning so fast, you could inch your way up.
Centrifugal force, or
Yes.
it would hold you against the wall.
So you would not be touching the floor any longer. You're just spinning so fast. And then, of course, you had the one kid that got sick and puked. And then, yeah, you can imagine.
Oh, I never would have got on that. I have never been on something like that.
We went up with a church group, and peer pressure, Bill, it's a real thing, especially coming from teenage girls. When you're a teenager, it's like, come on, ride this with me. And I was the same way. It's like, I am not getting in that. They literally took a hose in at the end of every ride and was hosing down. You can imagine.
Wow.
And they're like, oh yeah, let's go in this. And it's like peer pressure, especially from teenage girls. Yeah, I did it. And I did not puke. Thank goodness. Nobody puked on our ride, but that was one of the scariest moments of my teenage life, and why they had that ride there. I don't understand.
Well, Eric, I will say is when you say, peer pressure, especially from a teenage girl, when you're a teenage boy and a teenage girl wants you to do something, I don't know how your mind worked, but when I was
Bill, that's the point.
When I was in my later teens, I think every interaction with a female went along these lines. She's cute. If I do what she's asking me to do, maybe there will be physical contact later. When you talk about, I took my very first drink because there was an attractive female in the room that was like, come on. And so I took a drink, and I mean, it did pay off the way I was hoping, to be fair. But yeah, that's a story that's not for this podcast.
Well, along the same lines, did you ever have your parents or people tell you to fear cooties?
That was just a school thing. Like, I never heard about. Now, by extension, I think cooties was just a term that was unfortunately linked to lice.
Okay. You're taking it down a different route. I was like, if you ever kiss a girl, you're going to catch cooties.
I didn't grow up in a repressive household like you did.
Now, I didn't know what cooties was back then.
But you didn't want it.
I didn't. It sounded like something was going to make your lips fall off, or maybe even your private parts fall off. I didn't want no part of that. But yeah, if you kiss a girl, you're gonna catch cooties.
Unfortunately, the cooties thing did happen for me growing up. But again, I think where I grew up, unfortunately, I think the connection was to lice.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, the school that I grew up in had a very bad problem with that, and I can be honest and say that happened in my household more than once.
I remember it happened with our kids growing up in school, and
it did happen with my kids a couple of times.
I think every school has that. I think it's just part of it.
Well, you get a bunch of people.
If people are being
honest, and it can happen to anybody. I don't want to say it can happen to anybody.
Yeah.
Just you get a lot of people in confined spaces, and whatever one of them has, they're going to give to someone else.
And I mean, let's face it, especially as kids, we were even dumber than we are today. How many times it's like, hey man, I got this cap. Try this cap on.
Not supposed to share
these headphones. Check out these headphones and try them on. And we did.
Hey, this sucker's really good. You want to lick?
Yeah, I want to lick of this.
We did all
sucker?
Kinds of dumb stuff.
Yeah, stupid stuff. Well, I'm going to go back to school, and I don't know if you were ever in shop class.
I did one year in shop. I mean, I'm not the shop kind of dude. You know me well enough.
Well, I labeled this shop class horrors because I have 3 bullet points.
Well, I do remember teachers with missing fingers.
There you go. That's one. I think every shop teacher either was missing an eye, had an eye patch, or missing at least one finger or a part of one finger.
Fingers in my case.
Yeah, I remember wood lathes. Like you would put a block of wood on and clamp it in, and you'd make, spindles and all kinds of stuff. What could possibly go wrong? I mean, you're cautioned about all this as a kid, and this is one that was a real. I mean, obviously, you could injure yourself or get killed.
Oh yeah, like
lean in on that block of wood with the super sharp tool that's spinning at Mach 3.
There was something I wanted to say at the beginning that I probably should have. We're not going to downplay any of these things. Some of these are legitimate things to be afraid of.
Yeah.
Killer bees or nuclear war or being mutilated in shop class. Those things happen. They're real things.
I actually. And there was a name for it, and I don't remember what it was, but basically it was pouring molten lava into a mold that we hand pressed in sand.
Dude,
I made my dad a bird dog. He was really big into quail hunting, and it was like a 12, 14-inch bird dog point. This was molten lava metal that we had leather gloves that you wore, and seriously, you could feel your eyebrows being singed off as you poured it.
You essentially had home versions of that, too. There were toys. Now, the metal ones, I think, were before they were before my time, but they absolutely had I think it was like little tin models you could do or something like that, or aluminum.
Oh,
but you did it at home.
I know what you're talking about.
And then
like a little creepy crawler bug kind of things.
Yeah, it would have come before those, but the creepy crawler thing, I mean, you essentially stuck a metal plate with this liquid goo, and you put it in an oven and you heated it up, and then you were just supposed to reach in and pull it out.
Yeah, it doesn't matter if it's metal or oozy goo or whatever. If it's those kind of hot temperatures, it's not going to feel good. And then my shop teacher, bless his heart, he was one of those that was missing, I think, 2 fingers. I remember when we finally got to a point where he felt we were mature enough, had enough experience, to run the wood planer. Now, for those of you who may not be that familiar, you take a rough cut piece of wood and put it through, and it basically would cut the top, make it a smooth edge. And I remember to this day, he's like, now, I'm going to warn you boys, when you put this wood in there and you hit a knot hole, it's going to kick back at you and it'll knock you plumb down. I mean, those was his exact words. That was his voice, I swear. And I remember like 3 days later, we come into shop class and the windows behind the lathe are busted out and there's plywood over it. And we're like, what happened? And he goes, well, remember when I was telling you boys? He goes, Jimmy Dean or whatever, he was back here last night and board came flying out and knocked his teeth out. Had to take him to the hospital, through the board, plumb out through the glass. I was like, oh my gosh, these were the things that, we did. It worked. We learned lessons.
The thing is, though,
skills.
The thing is, at times, though, I think, I don't know, maybe those things were punched up to scare you on purpose when they really, how many things were you taught to be afraid of that weren't that common? My wife, when she gave me this idea, she specifically said quicksand.
Oh, yeah.
Every movie, every TV show, I think G.I. Joe had a PSA on like, if you get caught in quicksand.
Everybody had quicksand. It was all the rage.
I looked up quicksand. Do you know it is technically impossible for a human being to sink in quicksand?
No.
Like you cannot.
Why didn't they tell us that in the 80s?
It's to do with the density. It is extremely rare that you will go
you mean
further than
Hollywood
your
is wrong on all those movies?
Yeah.
I saw people like totally just...
It is almost impossible for you to go any deeper than your waist. If you struggle, you can go deeper than your waist, which I think we know you're not supposed to struggle.
I think anybody growing up in the 80s, we know how not to drown in quicksand. We were taught the rules. Stay calm. Don't struggle.
Yeah.
Reach for a branch or a limb.
Get your monkey companion to throw a vine.
Yes. If you do these things, you will be safe from quicksand.
Or you swing over the quicksand while doing a...
George of the Jungle.
Well, I was thinking Atari Pitfall.
But we had movies out about that. One of the most horrific stories, great story, but the never-ending story.
Oh, the Swamp of Eternal Sorrow.
Swamp of Eternal Sorrow had the little boy that had his white horse, Artex, and he took him through, and the horse pauses and it begins to sink.
Well, the horse got sad.
And
if you got sad, it would claim you.
The boy struggled and cried, and we all watched in horrific terror.
Well, again,
as the quicksand swallowed this horse.
I think you and I literally, there was not a TV show, there was barely a movie that didn't have quicksand at some point, and the idea was, you're going to drown in quicksand.
I think that movie was PG.
Oh, it was. I'm sure. It was meant for kids.
I mean, that was horrific.
Kids' movies when we were growing up. I mean, if you think about it, even like look at Labyrinth. And those freaky dudes that rip their heads off and juggle them. Or the Dark Crystal and the Skeksis.
Oh my gosh, those were so scary as a kid.
Kids' movies had some pretty horrific stuff in it back then.
Well, what about, Bill? It's summer. It's a picnic. It's hot. Refreshing piece of watermelon. But don't eat the seeds.
Or they will grow in your stomach.
They will grow in your stomach. You'll have vines come out your nose, your mouth, your ears.
I do remember that. Why would they tell you that?
I have no idea.
I mean, is eating a watermelon seed that bad for you?
No, it's actually healthy.
So why were we taught that? Why were we told that growing
up? I
up?
have no idea. And for many, many years, I did not eat watermelon seeds. True story. Got married with my wife. That's not the part of the true story, but might be
unbelievable.
It might be surprising to a lot of people that know me.
You?
Somebody put up with me. I remember eating watermelon seeds, and she's like, "Did you just swallow that watermelon seed?" And it's like, "Yeah, they're crunchy." I was like eating them up, and she goes, "You're not supposed to do that." I mean, this was in our adulthood. I mean, still that message had, relayed. And it's like, no. And actually, yeah, they're like pumpkin seeds or something.
Well,
they actually got a lot of vitamins, minerals.
You want to go down that road. There's an episode of G.I. Joe where they kill some kind of weird monster by making it eat a bunch of apples, seeds and all. And so the apple seeds were so toxic that they would kill you. And that's why you didn't eat the apple core.
Ah.
Well, maybe you hadn't heard that one.
I hadn't heard that one.
Yeah, no, I remember that one.
I remember on potatoes, you don't eat potato skins. But my grandfather loved the potato skins. They are full of, that's what he said. He goes, basically they went through the Depression and stuff. He goes, you ate everything you could. But yeah, potato skins.
Yeah, I eat the whole.
was the thing.
I didn't eat them growing up, but I do eat the whole potato now.
Yeah. Well, what about as you sleep, things attack you like a spider crawling across your face and goes in your ear?
Okay, well, I thought you were going to go to the old "you eat X number of spiders." I was going to say that is an exaggeration,
Yeah.
but no.
Well, that is one as well.
Insects, spiders, roaches, things like that,
And lay eggs.
Now, I always heard that, and that was it. The scary stories to tell in the dark, where the spider lays the eggs and the cheese. They don't really do that, but those images were horrific and terrifying.
Yes.
And man, I feel like I reveal a lot about we grew up rough, didn't have a lot of money. Things weren't exactly the best. We had a roach problem in my house for a little while.
Yeah.
It was mainly isolated to like the kitchen, but still.
Again, I think if most people are honest,
Well, I mean, everybody
it happens.
probably happens.
It happens.
And, we didn't have air conditioning, so we tended to leave the windows open, so you get like flies and mosquitoes. And I remember some nights being just miserable, just devoured in mosquito bites, or, every couple of minutes a fly might land on you and you'd freak out. My mom did the best she could as a single mom. I'll give her that.
Sure.
But I am glad that those are things that I don't have to worry about. But, and again, like you said, I mean, I think everybody, if they're being honest, they run into it happens from time to time. You get a mouse or whatever.
Oh, yeah. Especially if in your rural area. I mean, mice surrounded by fields. Another PG-rated movie that kind of goes with that. Do you remember Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan?
Oh, with the earworms?
I think that's where a lot of that comes from. Poor Chekhov. And he's got this thing that's like crawling across his cheek and
I think
playfully going around the ear.
I think you have that backwards. I think they have that scene because they knew it was something that would freak people out.
True. Okay. But yeah, right there in the big old ear hole, going down in there and
Well, I mentioned mosquitoes and things. One of the things that we were always supposed to be afraid of course, was insect-borne disease.
Mm-hmm.
Lyme disease became a thing in our time.
Very real thing.
Ticks were definitely something to worry about. Mosquitoes.
And you grew up in Missouri in the rural areas. Well, you go out and walk it, you're going to get ticks.
Well, and the thing is when you're growing up and they tell you like, oh, mosquitoes spread malaria. They don't tell you that that's mainly in like South America and whatnot. So like every mosquito
they flew
bite,
a really long ways to come to Missouri.
Or the tick thing, especially now, I guess there's another tick-borne fever that can cause you to have meat allergies.
Yeah, I think we touched upon that on one of the...
Let me say that, meat allergies. I said that weird. But
I think we touched upon that in one of our other episodes, actually.
But yeah, it's you would get ticks on you. I remember getting into seed ticks when I was little and just scratching and itching, and
we used to call them chiggers. Itty bitty little tiny things.
But I was always worried I was going to get some horrific disease from mosquitoes or ticks or something. Never did, but I always knew it was going to happen. But I was kind of a hypochondriac kid too. I knew I was going to get AIDS. Even though now as an adult, I know how you get AIDS.
Oh my gosh, when AIDS broke out.
Absolutely was not a thing that was going to happen to me as a kid unless I needed some kind of blood transfusion.
My parents told me not to drink out of a water fountain. I didn't for like 3 years.
Well, you had the kid that got it from a blood transfusion before they really started doing that.
Didn't test for it or look for it.
There were a lot of things that parents didn't tell you how you could get it very clearly. You just knew that it was possible to get it and it was terrible. And to be fair, you could jump that up to the Ebola scare from about, 10 or so years ago?
Mm-hmm.
It was like, oh, everybody's going to get Ebola. Well, I mean, it's mainly isolated to places in Africa, and the only reason it came to America is because somebody came here from Africa.
From Africa, yeah.
So, if you don't communicate how diseases spread, then, like I said, people are going to be afraid to get them.
You got another one?
I got two that I kind of feel go together. And to be fair, I've heard some stories recently that I can kind of touch on with them. Stranger danger and drugs.
Stranger danger.
I know you and I definitely grew up in a time frame where you were taught not to trust strangers, don't take rides from strangers, don't take candy from strangers. But it's an ice cream truck,
and they said they'd give me free ice cream.
Well, the other part of that was
dressed
also
as a clown.
The other part of that was also like, drugs, which, was like, oh, if somebody offers you drugs, don't take them. I've never been offered drugs by a stranger once in my life. Not that I'm wanting it. I'm just saying it's never happened.
We're adults. We're going to sit here and we're like, okay, I think everybody would now commonly know most drugs are expensive. Why would anybody
why would you
give away expensive drugs?
What was the logic of that? They're going to give you the first one for free
to
get
hook
you,
I guess. But it's like, come on.
But then also the stranger danger thing, I ingrained that in my kids so well. We were at Walmart in Waynesville, and mind you, my family's from, this area. So it's not uncommon to run into somebody I know. And we were at Walmart in Waynesville. We did not know my brother and my mom and them were going to be there. We went there before we were going to meet them for dinner, not knowing they were doing the same thing. My brother comes up behind my son and scoops him up. And the absolute blood-curdling scream that we had to turn around, and just to turn around and see my brother's eyes to be the size of, a silver dollar, and just like, I'm sorry, it's me, it's you. He's freaking out. It's me, your uncle.
Wow.
So even now, like,
And you're like,
yeah, it's
that
all right.
worked.
But, I mean, he did what he was supposed to do, right? So
Well, you had mentioned earlier piranhas.
I had an unreasonable fear of piranhas because of those stupid movies. There was a pond. You're going to get into those, I'm sure. But Piranha 2, The Spawning.
The
Have you ever seen that
Spawning,
one?
yes.
Where they fly?
Yes,
they're, like,
I forgot
hybridized?
about that. Yes.
There was a pond
Flying piranha fish.
behind my house, and I just knew that one day
Did you have piranhas?
they were going to come flying out of there.
Well, I mean, even we've talked about on the podcast, they have found piranhas at Lake of the Ozarks, not
Yeah.
far away from here. But what they don't tell you is that people swim with piranhas all the time.
They're not as dangerous as people, like the movies and stuff and the cartoons, they show them like just clearing a corpse in like 5 seconds.
Yeah. Now, granted, if you slice both wrists and you wade it out into the water, yeah, I mean, come on, it's like a buffet. But yeah, there are people that swim with piranhas every day. But my gosh, there were so many movies and stuff that was portrayed as real that, yeah, like you said, you just dive in and you don't have a
You're
chance
gone.
to swim out.
Yeah.
I mean, they'll just pick every piece of morsel off of your bone.
My grandparents told me that a piranha could strip a body in like under 5 minutes or something. So the idea for me, and like you're saying, if you got into water with piranhas,
You ain't got a
were
chance
done.
to get out. Yeah.
I mean, and then you watch the piranha movies.
If you went down hanging onto a rope that somebody lowered you into a pool, they couldn't pull you up fast
Yeah.
enough. I mean, it was that
Yeah.
quick. Just
And we've seen the movies and the footage, like the documentary footage. Well, what they don't tell you in the documentary footage, and I think I could swear we talked about piranhas once before. Maybe we did, maybe we didn't. I don't know.
we did with the Lake of the Ozarks.
But in a lot of places, the only time people get eaten, or not, I don't even say eaten. Eaten's not the right. The only time they get bit, like they're fishing, they clean a bunch of fish on the shore, they toss all the junk in the water, and then they reach in the water to wash their hands off, and they get nipped.
Piranhas need glasses.
Well, they don't see very
They get
well.
a little confused.
Well, and they live in rivers that are all murky.
And because all the blood and stuff from all the bodies that they've picked all.
Yeah, all the stripped corpses.
What about swallowing bubblegum?
7 years. Takes 7 years to get out of your system.
Did you ever hear the stories that if you could die if you swallowed it, like within like the next night or as you sleep?
I don't know that I heard that. I think it was just the time frame, because I guess the idea would be is if you swallowed enough, it would clog you up on the inside.
Well, yeah, it's like
But it
magnets.
takes 7 years.
Apparently, I was told it's like magnets. Like if you swallow a piece of gum one day and then like 2 weeks later you accidentally swallow, they get together.
Yeah,
And then
I
you would
think
have
that
like
was-
this giant growth that would like come out between your ribs and
Which-
stuff.
I mean, the truth of the matter is it's no different than swallowing anything else. It just goes right through.
Exactly. But why the were we told this crap?
My favorite new one, if you want to go back to swimming for a minute, is the brain-eating amoebas.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen those headlines?
Mm-hmm.
Now, you literally have to go swimming in like a murky pool, and you have to snort the water and all that other stuff. But still, that one's one that freaks me out and makes me not want to swim.
Well, there's another one where you got the worm that goes up the other area
I didn't.
when you swim.
What?
Yeah, I think it's like in Africa or the Congos.
Oh, I think that's a fish.
Is this fish?
I used to know the name of it even. It's got little spines on it.
It swims up your privates.
Yeah, it goes in your
Yeah.
beep.
Your beep.
Yeah, and then it's got little spines so you can't pull
You
it
can't
out.
pull it back out.
And it's horrific and it sounds terrible.
Well, along those same lines, leeches.
You ever have one on you?
I have.
I have once.
It freaked me out.
The funniest story I have about that, and it was, we had gone to a park with a friend and there was some stagnant water. Like, we're out in the river, so in the middle everything was flowing, but there were these little side channels.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah. Great spot to go
And
catfishing.
The kids were kind of tromping through those, and one of the kids got one on his foot, and the dad pulled it off, because it's what you do.
Yeah.
And I remember the mom was sort of a like very overprotective mom, and she was freaking out about it, like almost like we need to take him to the hospital, and it was like, no, it's cool.
Correct me if I'm wrong. I think a leech has like some anticoagulant that so they numb the area so
It
you
numbs
don't
the
even
area,
feel
and it
as they
it lets
bite.
the blood flow, but basically once you get it off, that goes away pretty quickly.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, so you could have a leech on you and not realize it for a little period of time.
Well, also, I mean, there is also the risk of, it having some sort of bloodborne disease. I mean, it is possible
Could have
for
flew,
something bad
It could
to
have
happen.
flew in from Africa like Piranha 2, you know.
But for the most part, I don't think you really have much to worry. I just had a little tiny one on my foot once. I mean, after going fishing.
I think mine was on my calf and my leg, and we were wading out in the river.
Well, of
in the
course.
water. And
you and I, we both have the iconic Stand By Me,
where
they're covered in leeches.
Gordy.
And then he reaches down in his pants. And
No, it was his underwear, Bill. It will be explicit.
I mean, that's what I meant. I didn't.
He reaches down, and of course they don't show anything, but
then
the
he
boys
just
are all
passes out.
watching, and he pulls this leech up, and there's blood all over his hand, and he passes out.
Well, that'd be a bad place to have a leech.
Oh my gosh.
There's a lot of blood flow there anyway. So,
Hmm.
so as Eric and I are sitting here comparing notes, this may have to be a one that we revisit at some
A
point.
part 2.
Because I still have like the fears that I have as an adult and the fears of things yet to come.
I still have a bunch from the 80s because,
Well.
yeah, they petrified us in the 80s. They threw a lot of stuff at us.
And we still have to do headlines.
Headlines. So let's move forward.
Well, I wanted to look at fears. Obviously, that's sort of what we're talking about, and what are we afraid of, and not just you and I, but people in general. And I found from the New York Times by Matt Richtel, dated January 19th, 2024. What are we so afraid of? Here's the expert to ask. Christopher Bader studies Americans' prevailing fears. And if you guess clowns, you're not entirely wrong. Now, Chris Bader, he's a sociologist at Chapman University in Orange, California. And he has 3 times been the principal investigator on the annual Chapman Survey of American Fears. This has been going on, I think, since 2013. Every year they do a survey, and they just try to... What are Americans afraid of?
What are you afraid of?
The survey asks adults about dozens of topics: nuclear war, pollution, volcanic eruptions, zombies.
Zombie.
And then it ranks the fears in order of common, prevalence, in order. Now, Dr. Bader also studies religion and conspiracy theories and finds that these 2 topics often come to crossroads with one another, for obvious reasons. Now, the most recent survey was published in October of 2023, and in an interview, he was asked to discuss some of the latest findings. And so I've kind of summarized, I've left certain pieces out to try to focus more on the stuff that we were talking about. He was asked about a variety of topics, and he said most Americans right now are afraid of government corruption.
Okay.
60% of Americans answered they were afraid of corrupt government officials. Now, the thing is, corruption means different things to different people, and both progressives and conservatives were afraid of government corruption. So it's on both sides. It's not limited to one side or the other. And both sides obviously have a different idea of what that looks like.
The definition of corruption.
Now, this fear has been with Americans for a long time. It's not, for anybody who's sitting there going, oh, I know where this is going. This did not start with Donald Trump. This did not start with Obama. This was an American fear. It goes all the way back.
Flashbacks. I am not a crook.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, when asked why that was the case, he said he felt it had to do with uncertainty. Your average person really doesn't know how everything in the government works. And I'll sit here and say, there's too many moving pieces.
Yeah. Yep.
But it still has such a huge effect on their lives. So, the uncertainty of it all makes them scared. In times of societal change, like great changes in the economy, whether it's going to crash or get better, or big events like terrorist attacks and pandemics, things like that, those create uncertainty, and you don't know what your world's going to be like a year from now. We can all cast our minds back just a couple years ago with COVID and all the stuff that happened there. And here we are,
Who saw that coming?
Well, and here we are, 3 years later, and life is almost normal. We still think about it, but it hasn't been, that big an impact overall.
Until Wave 2 is released.
But when people are uncertain, their fear goes up. But also, again, it doesn't just apply to government. Now, strangely enough, he does bring this to clowns, and not just the ones in government. I couldn't help it.
I like what you
wanted
did
that
there.
joke.
Segue.
It's again, Bader says, quote, I'm uncertain about who this clown is, and therefore I'm afraid of clowns. It's the uncertainty. And I know I've said that. You don't know who's behind the makeup.
Yeah.
And it could be Bozo the Clown.
It's like the Wizard of Oz. What's behind the curtain?
Could be John Wayne Gacy.
Yeah. Yeah.
About 6% of Americans, by the way, say they're afraid of clowns. Now, looking at
I actually expected that to be higher.
Yeah. Looking at the top 10 fears from the latest survey, Americans feared economic and financial collapse, Russian use of nuclear weapons,
There we go again.
the United States becoming involved in another world war, people I love becoming seriously ill, people I love dying, pollution from drinking water, biological warfare, cyber terrorism, not having enough money for the future.
That's some pretty real stuff.
Yeah. Trends that come from the data show that there are always things related to current events. Government corruption is always pretty high, but then you always have those common fears about friends and family and taking care of yourself and your loved ones. Now, when questioned about the media's influence on fears, which goes back to what I was talking about earlier, I told you, it ties into my headline here. He said the media gives us what we want. It gives us something to fear, the scary thing, the thing in the dark. And that's what attracts our attention.
Yeah, boy, isn't that true?
Yeah, there's a huge confirmation bias factor as well. If you're afraid of Trump or Hunter Biden, you'll be attracted to information that reinforces that fear. Those are the things you'll see. Those are the things you'll talk about. Those are the links you're going to click.
I mean, look at the news channels. How much of it is negative compared to how much is positive news stories?
When you also have the novelty factor of it all. If you're looking at headlines and you see one about a fight in a bar, and you see another headline that's about Jimmy the toe-eating serial killer, you're going to click on the story about Jimmy. Even though the bar thing could happen to you on any given day if you go to a bar, you're still going to click on that other headline because it's more interesting. And many people feel now that things are worse than they were years ago. And when asked about that, Bader responded, by basically any measure, the world is a better place now than it was centuries ago, 50, 100, 200 years ago. People live longer. We have better, more material comfort. The problem is, in sociology, you have a thing called relative deprivation. You don't look at what life was like 100 years ago when you're measuring your quality of life. You don't look at how it was 20 years ago.
Very true.
You don't look at what's going on in the town across, up the road. You gauge yourself by the people around you. So you look at your next door neighbor and the car that he's driving, or the nice houses a block over.
The new John Deere riding lawnmower that he's got.
You're judging yourself against those things and you're like, wow, man, everything's rough. And that's not to say, I'm not going to sit here and say things aren't rough or that people aren't struggling. We 100% are.
But we need to be thankful for the things we have.
Well, I was going to say, if you're trying to figure out how to pay your cell phone bill, that's a lot less of a problem than trying to figure out how to pay for food.
Yeah.
So.
Or the internet, or the subscription channels to 50 channels that we vaguely ever watch.
He also said that it's not fashionable or welcome to talk about things being positive or how good things are, because when you talk about how good things are, people perceive that as you saying things don't need to change. And here's a good quote. I liked this. For example, if you say that there has been some progress made on racial relations, that can suggest that you're not aware of the recent increases in extremism or the need for even more progress. Discussing positive progress on any measure also goes against our tendency to be attracted to bad news and things that frighten us. Unfortunately, we're just not good at nuance. So to say things are pretty good.
I can personally relate to that. I try to be a positive person.
Yeah.
I'm a firm believer that you are a part of what you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with negativity, you're going to be negative. If you surround yourself with positive people, you're going to be positive. Unfortunately, I'm not positive all the time, so I'm kind of somewhere in the happy medium, and I do the best I can. But I have been in conversations and make a comment, that I think we have come a little ways with this. And it's seriously like you spit in someone's face a lot of times. I mean, they just come at you, and they're like, well, you didn't read about this, and this just happened. And I remember thinking to myself, okay, this person is impossible. I'm just going to shut up now and just
the
walk
thing
away.
is, you're not saying there's not room for improvement.
Exactly.
You're just saying things are better than they were.
Yeah. And I look at that person as a Debbie Downer, a very negative person that I don't like to be around. I'll just say it.
So when asked, what do you personally most fear for us? He said, and I got another quote here, information tunneling and information silos, algorithms. This is not a conservative or liberal or progressive type thing. It happens to everyone. When I watch MSNBC, I see the exact reverse of Fox. The algorithms quickly figure out what you want, and that's all that you see. That is incredibly harmful. Every day, all we're seeing is a broadcast that's designed to tap into our fears. And when asked, what are you most afraid of? To me, there's this idea of fears and phobias, and the distinction is muddy. One of the things I am afraid of is getting needles stuck in my arm. I am the person who will put off getting blood drawn for as long as possible. So I feel he kind of closed it on sort of a simple thing. I mean, we can all be afraid of getting stuck with a needle.
Yeah, yeah. Well, for my headline, I'm going to actually pick up with something you touched upon with yours, and I think it's very, very real. I'm going to take us back to just a few years ago. Probably most of us would like to have forgotten 2020. But in specific, the childhood trauma that was caused by this whole ordeal. I remember talking to Bill while we were at work where we both previously worked when the first coronavirus alerts were happening.
Well, if you remember, I was talking about like the stuff that was going on in China way before it came here.
Yep.
And was like, man, they're shutting down cities and they're locking people in buildings.
And then it was just like, bloop, it's here.
Yeah.
You know, as managers, both of us were managers there. What would that mean to us? Well, we found out that we were deemed a crucial workforce.
Essential.
Essential
word
workforce.
of the day.
That was the word. Essential workforce. So what did that mean for us? What would that mean for our employees? You know, we were told, well, you need to wash your hands for 30 seconds and wear face masks, sanitize all surfaces multiple times a day. You know, as it was for many people, it was pretty scary for us. But imagine how that would have been for a small child, and maybe a child at an age who didn't really fully understand everything that was going on, but now is left to deal with it. You know, even in the months and years following, mandated masks had to be worn by children to get back to their normal activities, like going to school. I found a U.S. news publication that stated the following. Somewhere between 37,300 and 43,000 children lost a parent to COVID-19. Losses which appear to have hit families of color especially hard, according to early data. Now, another blurb from the same article gives a little bit more insight, a little bit more facts to the fear. In March 2020, the coronavirus pandemic swept across the country, shutting down schools for more than 50 million children, millions of whom relied on that for food, physical, mental health care, shelter, and safety. It thrust millions of parents into unemployment and set in motion a mental health crisis that, after more than a year of loss, grief, and isolation, has manifested into breathtaking levels of anxiety, depression, drug, alcohol use, gun violence, and domestic abuse. Some pretty grim stuff. A lot of the children missed an entire year of school, some more than that. Some parents wouldn't let their kids return to public schools. We saw homeschooling take a huge, rocket boost.
Well, and I'm going to be this guy. There were also people on the opposite end of that spectrum that sent kids to school when they shouldn't have.
Yes.
And that
absolutely.
is how we got COVID in my house.
Yes. Now, we are learning that this gap in being around, interacting with children of their age during this crucial development stage of their lives has affected many children's well-being and learning. Sure, some had laptop-style devices, maybe even to emulate a classroom. They could dial up or get into the internet, discuss with even their personal teachers and peers. But let's face it, even that's different. That's not the norm. Not everybody had access to that, obviously. We had these young children literally cooped up inside the house. Many parents even feared letting their kids go outside for fear of them coming in contact with the virus because it was so misunderstood, misconstrued. We were getting so much data thrown at us.
And a part of that, I think, does go to the trend, which is unfortunate. And I may drift a little political, so you have to forgive me. There's a good example of this, and I can't remember where I saw it, but there was a time when Americans revered achievement and intellect. We looked at the smartest and the best amongst us and said, that is what we want to be.
Yes.
Now, we almost do the opposite of that.
I agree.
You're too smart. We don't trust the people who are the experts. If I go to the doctor's office, I'm going to the doctor because he's an expert. And if he tells me, if you don't want to get COVID, do this, this, and this, I'm going to listen to the doctor. But there are so many people who in that same position would go, well, he doesn't know what he's talking about.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's the expert. If you and me sitting right here, right now, if I needed to know something about the reselling business or I had a question or whatever, I would go to you. You're my expert. You're the guy that I know who knows things. The same goes if you had a computer question, I would think, hey, I know Bill's got a degree.
Yeah.
But there are absolutely people in this world that would look at you knowing that that's what you do for a living and go, well, he doesn't know anything about reselling.
Yeah. And Bill doesn't know anything about computers.
Bill doesn't know a dang thing about computers, which is unfortunately true, but for entirely different reasons.
And I mean, to add insult to injury, these kids really got a first-hand front row seat of a totally different life, maybe with their parents or guardians losing their jobs, overhearing that parent or guardian or parents losing their homes, fear of running out of food, or God forbid, running out of toilet paper. That was a real thing.
Well, and to reflect on real life experience, the impacts of that are still being felt, like you said.
Yes.
I attended my son's college graduation. He graduated from Mizzou a couple weeks ago,
Congratulations.
Yeah, I'm incredibly proud. A very hardworking young man and has earned everything he's gotten. But part of the commencement speech that was given by the administration, the guy who's the head of Mizzou, and I don't remember his name. I think his last name's Choi, if I remember correctly. But he said, he specifically said, this class here, he says, I look out amongst you, almost none of you had a high school graduation.
Yes.
This is the only class that I will ever speak to that did not get to graduate from high school.
Yep.
Like a normal kid.
Which was like a rite of passage thing.
It's a thing.
I mean, it is huge.
Well, and for my son in particular, I mean, it was delayed by a few. I think his graduation ended up being in July. But unfortunately, his graduation ended up being a spreader event. Multiple people went who knowingly had COVID to participate in this. And I think there was at least 25 cases they could say came out of that graduation ceremony. So.
Well, and then, I mean, there were many that simply didn't even get a graduating celebration, graduating class celebration. But let's not forget also, and some people may not agree with this, but the prom dance, the football games of the last of your senior year. I mean, this is a time of evolving. You're getting ready to step out into the rest of your life, the workforce, college, whatever that may be.
You want a good real-time example of how fast all this happened, even though my kid went to a robotics competition on a Saturday, I think down Springfield, Branson, somewhere like that. And it was canceled on the way.
Oh, wow.
Because of this all coming together. This was before the schools had within a week, the schools had made that decision. But you're talking things were being canceled while kids were on their way to them.
In transit. Wow. Well, the truth is there's a lot to be afraid of, and uncertainty will always be one of them.
That's what the guy in the interview said.
Most never come full circle, but unfortunately, some crises and tragedies and things to be afraid of do. And I guess, that is why our animal instinct whispers to us even today that, something's just not right. You get a bad vibe, your spidey sense, I use that term a lot, but, turn around. Maybe there's a reason.
I think there's a little bit extra to people. There's things we just don't understand. When they talk about that gut feeling and how you're supposed to trust it, I kind of believe that.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
as I get older, I more and more trust that.
Well, we've talked about that, like meeting people and just something doesn't feel right. There is a person, and I'm not naming names, and there is someone that I have met in my life that everybody seems to like. Everybody who's met this person really likes this person.
Probably very charismatic.
This person has always put me on guard every time I've been around them.
Yep.
So
probably a reason for that.
I'm thinking this person's going to turn out to be a serial killer someday, but I could be wrong. And it could just be me. Maybe I'm just me,
I've probably mentioned this before, but at my age, there are certain, I've met a lot of people, especially in business. And there were some of them that I will say totally fooled me. I mean, I thought the world of these people, mentors, I'll even use the word. And then something happened, and it was like, to your point, there was that, he's almost too good to be true. It's just, wow. But no, I'm going to roll with it, and then come to find out they're a total piece of trash.
There's been a couple of times where I've bought it hook, line, and sinker. And with some people, the warning signs were there, but I didn't see them. I will say one that caught me completely off guard was a gentleman that worked for me for a while, and I thought we got along very well, and he had nothing but glowing things to say about me at every opportunity. I was on vacation one day, came back the next day. He had submitted a 2-page written statement. I would say almost 100% falsehoods to the HR department about all the terrible things I had done, all the terrible things I was responsible for. And as a supervisor, you're trained to not react to those things.
Right.
But he continued to try to be friendly. And so one day he said something to me, and I just turned to him and I said, I do have a question for you, actually, because I hadn't talked to him for a little while, And he said, what is that? And I said, why did you lie about me? I didn't lie about you. I said, almost everything that you said to HR was a lie. I don't believe that. I said, well, it doesn't have to be. I don't care what you believe. I know what the truth is. You're talking about someone. This is a work environment where you have to wear earplugs because the sound is so loud. And he's saying that from 60 feet away, he overheard a conversation I was having with somebody.
I call bullshit.
And a person who was half deaf as it was. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, no, you did. You absolutely did not but
Humanly
yeah.
impossible.
Yeah, there's been a couple of people in my life that I just
The old spidey senses kick in for a reason, sometimes at least.
when push came to shove, they weren't there like they should have been. All right, this might get a little personal,
Uh-oh, I love these questions.
but and I hope we haven't already covered it. Do you have something that you consider an irrational fear? And if so, are you comfortable revealing that to the world?
Well, that is almost verbatim
Or
my
the-
question. That
Well,
I had.
then
So
we've only got one question. I
My
guess.
question was, what really scared you as a child growing up? Maybe
Well,
something we
okay.
talked about,
Those are different
or
questions,
something we didn't
though.
talk about.
Those are different questions.
But my answer's
You're-
probably going to be the
Well,
same.
I would say irrational now versus irrational then. Let's do that.
Okay.
Do you have something now? Mine is for now.
Now.
What is something right now that you consider an irrational fear? And something that you can say to yourself, like, it makes no sense to be afraid of that, but I still am.
Wow.
I mean, it's fine if you don't have an answer. I would understand because
I've got a lot of things I'm afraid of, but at this point in my life, I feel
you feel
they're
like
real.
They're legit.
Yeah.
Well, maybe I go first and you can see what I say.
Okay.
And
Okay.
it'll
Let's
give you-
do that.
I have this irrational fear that I'm going to be crushed by something huge. I don't know why. You know, like you see the falling rock signs as you drive
okay.
by. I am terrified that I'm going to be the guy that catches the falling rock. You know what I mean?
Okay.
If I stand next to something really big, if I go to Elephant Rock State Park,
One of those
I get a
rocks that
little
hasn't
nervous.
moved in thousands
Yeah.
of years is going to
this rock
suddenly
that's
roll
been here
over on you.
forever going to fall on me.
Okay. Okay. I guess then I would say something that has been with me since a young child is drowning under the ice of a frozen pond, like falling through. And it goes
Okay.
back to that stupid Damien Omen movie where like the current sweeps you away and they're chasing this poor guy as the current, he's beating on the ice like it's the opposite side of a glass window. I have this huge fear of dying of suffocation or something along those lines, but especially falling through ice. And let's face it, we're in Missouri. Not that it doesn't get cold, but it doesn't usually get cold
Rarely
enough.
enough that you'd go on the ice.
Yeah, you would never go on the ice because it's at best a quarter of an inch thick.
Yeah.
But I guess that would be my best answer. So my question, a slightly different spin. What was it that really scared you as a child growing up? Maybe something we talked about tonight, maybe something we didn't get to tonight.
Now, you know me. I'm a horror movie guy.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is the exposure to horror movies started at a much too young an age because my mom didn't filter the content that I was exposed to.
It's all PG.
And so a good answer I feel for that would be, you know, the movies scared me, but I want to go back to a particular movie. If only because honestly, lately I've been super into the Alien franchise. I've been rewatching some of the movies. I have an Alien RPG game I'm playing with my kids. And so it's really been on my mind a lot lately. But to go back to that, I remember watching the original Alien on TV with my mom, like an ABC Sunday night movie thing.
Mid-'80s, I think, time frame.
When that thing came out of that guy's chest, I remember running from the room screaming. Now, fast forward, I think the year would be, I want to say 86, maybe. I think is the year, if I remember correctly. My mom took us to a triple feature at the drive-in of The Fly,
Mm-hmm.
Friday the 13th, Part 6,
Mm.
and Aliens. Now, 86, I'd have been like 9 years old, right? Here I am.
That's
I
pretty young.
still remember this thing coming out of the guy's chest a few years ago, scaring me to death. Aliens, of course, is that same movie with all that thing, the same stuff happening like a million times.
Oh, yeah, face huggers and, yeah,
I don't think I talked for a solid 24 hours.
you were traumatized.
I was traumatized. Now, here's the best part. You know when you're a little kid and you have the coats that have like the plastic shell? You know, the rubbery sleeve material?
Yeah. Okay.
And so it's kind of reflective. And
yeah.
Now imagine you've just seen the movie Aliens and you have a dark gray colored winter coat hanging in your closet with that rubbery, shiny
Alien
material.
skin.
And it looks just like the head of one of these aliens in your closet. And in your mind, you know what it is. And in your mind, you also know
What it could be.
that could be an alien.
Hiding in my closet, waiting for me to go to sleep.
And those lines between reality and fiction, I would say were not as solid for me as a kid as maybe they were for a lot of other kids. I know a lot of other kids that watch scary movies and they never had an effect on them. Like, you know, they might have had a nightmare or whatever. But man, that stuff hung with me as a kid. So
Understandably. Well, for me, and I think I've talked about this before, it was Black Panthers. I mean, obviously we live here in Missouri, and I don't even know if Black Panthers are a thing. They used to say mountain lions didn't exist, but I know there's a few of those around.
They would say Black Panthers are not real, but there are what's
color-
melanistic.
Color variation.
So it is like a mutation, but like as a species,
But
no.
My fear goes to like the Jungle Book, like that jet black panther right out of the jungles. Hint, hint, Eric, there's no jungles in Missouri, but
it's like me being afraid of the piranhas in the pond.
yeah, but we did a lot of camping, everything from tents to pull behinds to RVs. But a lot of times I spent a lot of time on the river, around the lakes, camping with my folks. And, there was these times when obviously you would drive this desolate dirt gravel road after dark. And I always had this phobia, this fear that in the headlights of this country road, you would see this Black Panther. And it would always move really slow, like it was about to play with its food. It wasn't in any hurry, but it was so big you had to stop the car. Well, then it might, start to come up and maybe even jump up on the side of the car and look in the window at you or jump up on the hood. I had nightmares for probably a decade of that type of an encounter. Now, thank goodness they always ended and I woke up before it got in the car or did anything. But I would wake up in a sweat. My heart would just be racing. And again, it was so stupid because we don't even have those around here. But that was the thing that it seriously petrified me growing up.
Well, I think there may be a part 2 to this in the future.
I think
there's
so.
definitely enough material here. Like Eric said earlier, I still have a lot more to cover, and I think Eric still has a lot more to cover.
Be looking forward to part 2. But we hope you've enjoyed at least a few of the tidbits and personal influence stories that Bill and I have shared tonight. And looking back, some of it's very real and some of it we have to chuckle upon. But that's all what makes it a good story for a storyteller. Thanks for listening, y'all. We appreciate you.
Hey, real quick, call to action. I think Eric would agree. We'd like to grow this. Nightmares on the Lost Highway.
Absolutely.
If you could, if you're listening on Apple, if you would go and give us a review and rate us. If you have some feedback, that's fine too. Whatever platform you're listening, follow us, rate us, give us some reviews. That helps get some recognition and gets our name out there.
We do have a Facebook page, Nightmares on the Lost Highway. You can easily find us if you want to communicate with us, if you want to share some possibilities for future podcasts with us. Reach out. We want to talk with you guys.
I want to take a time to thank the people that helped bring this all together. Alex Tudor, you can almost call him our producer at this point. Sarah Tudor, who also helps with some of the technical stuff. I want to take a moment to extend thanks to Eric for letting us use his space to record in, kind of our makeshift studio.
I, in turn, would like to thank Bill for, one, putting up with me and using this camaraderie to do something we both very much love and enjoy doing, and thank Bill's family for allowing him to spend all the time to work and clean up our recordings and present them in what you hear in the final terms, the final edition, if you will.
And I'd like to thank all of you for continuing to listen. I know we've got some loyal followers out there. We do this as a labor of love, but we're happy that there are people that enjoy it hopefully as much as we do.
Thank you very much.